There's kind of two purposes to the session this evening. Firstly, to run through the guidance and to respond to any kind of questions and queries people have got for those who are planning to run their own camps and residentials in the next couple of months. And then Lauren's role this evening will be to give you an update and answer any questions around the camps for venturers and pioneers that we're hoping to run at our own centres over the summer. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of
Sit down.
where we're up to with the guidance and what the current situation is, and then we'll throw it open for questions if that's all right. If you've got questions that occur to you as we go along and you don't want to lose track of them, then whack them in the chat, and then that way we will hopefully not lose track of them. That would be great. And otherwise, just jump in as and when. I'm very happy to do that. I remember last time I started off with a quote from Gramsci about optimism of the spirit. Today, I think it's more my possibly distant ancestor, John Sedgwick, the great Union General, who is a warning against overconfidence. His last recorded words were, at the Battle of Spotsylvania, they couldn't hit an elephant at this, before he was taken out by Confederate sharpshooters. We are not out of the woods yet. This thing is still going round, it is still real, and just because the government has produced some guidance that says that we can go camping, it doesn't mean the danger is over. It's always my role to pour doom and gloom on things, because that's my role around here. The strong message that we're getting from the National Youth Agency is that it is all about balancing the risk of doing stuff with the benefit of doing stuff. It would clearly be safer for us to all stay at home and not do any activity over the summer from a COVID point of view, but there is an acknowledgement that that is not desirable from a mental health, from a social well-being point of view. And it's all about balancing and doing everything in the most safe way that we can, whilst not compromising the outcomes for our young people. And that's the kind of thought that we all need to keep in our mind, rather than going, oh, the NYA says we can go camping, so let's all just go camping and pretend that nothing's ever happened, it's all back to normal. If you take one thing away from tonight, it's that we're not back to normal yet. Just to give you the background, there is a successful vaccination rollout, but infection rates are beginning to rise again. And if you look at that graph, which is the latest graph from Public Health England, they are beginning to rise quite significantly. Against the background of vaccination rollout, that is felt to be less of an issue, hence that we are under less restrictions than we were under this time last year. However, the upside is that due to vaccination happening, there is not a similar uptick in hospitalisation rates. People are not getting as sick, but there are regional hotspots, and I think the official phrase is areas of enhanced response, Manchester here being one of them. And whilst it's not in the stage of localised lockdowns yet, we are being told that if we're in those areas of enhanced response, the authorities would rather us to keep our travel down. They would rather us keep travel to essential purposes. It is up to you as the leaders, as the coordinators of your groups, to make that judgment about whether it is in people's best interests, whether it is better to stay at home in response to a higher case rate in your local area, or whether it is better that we give the young people the residential experience that they've been craving for the last 18 months. And at the end of the day, only you and the other people and your fellow volunteers and the parents and carers that you work with can make the judgment about what's right and proportional in the circumstances. I'm here and I'm very happy to talk you through that and support that decision making. But at the end of the day, that's something that will be down to individual groups to decide and to manage. There is evidence that is suggesting quite strongly that schools are where transmission is happening now. And depending who you listen to and what day it is, the next steps in terms of government policy, at least in England, are at the moment fairly uncertain. The change of health secretary, however welcome, has not been helpful in terms of predicting which way the wind is going to blow. So that's the background against which we're issuing this guidance. Everyone's still with me so far? Nod and smile. There we go. Great. Currently, in England, we are still at step 3 of the roadmap to getting back to normal. What this means now is that because step 4 was delayed, we were given some updated guidance, which means that they've released some of the brakes that were on youth work activities, which means we can now go camping and we can take up to 30 young people when we go, 30 young people who are aged 18 or under. The upside that we weren't expecting is that adult volunteers are not included in that total cap restriction. So you can take 30 young people and a number of adult volunteers. The onus, there is no limit, but the onus on us is to be reasonable and proportional about the number of those adult volunteers. Our suggested ratios are probably a starting point, 1 to 5 for Elfins, 1 to 8 for Pioneers and all that stuff. One would normally expect that we would go camping with more than 1 leader for every 8 Pioneers, but we shouldn't be doing what I know some groups would normally do, which is taking children at practically a 1-to-1 ratio, unless there are really clear ideas, clear reasons why that's needed. Again, there are no hard and fast rules. I can happily talk through with you your plans and what you think might be reasonable and what you think might be achievable. But at the end of the day, it will come down to your call about what will work for your group or your district. Where we have been given absolutely clear guidance is that no more than 6 people, whether that's volunteers or young people, should be sharing any tent space or sleeping space, whether that's a dorm at a residential centre or whatever. And the other thing that we have been given is that lateral flow tests should be implemented for people who are basically kids who are high school age. So kids who have been attending high school age this year should be doing lateral flow tests. And the suggestion with that is that we do it once before we go and once when we come back, and every 48 to 72 hours while you're away. So if you're going for a 2-night camp, 48 hours duration, once before and once afterwards is fine. If you're away for 3 days, we suggest that you test on the middle day. In England, and I will contrast this to Scotland, have we got anyone from the Celtic Fringe with us? Have we got anyone Scotland or Wales today? I don't think we have. This is just an English session, isn't it? In England, the onus is very much on making sure you don't take the virus on holiday with you. In Scotland, by comparison, we can only have single occupancy of tents or dorms. So it is basically pretending that imagining that everybody is infectious, because there's no requirement about testing in Scotland. They're relying on distancing and relying on single occupancy as the things that are going to keep you safe and stop transmission. So you can see the very different approach that's being operated. Frankly, for Scotland, that's going to make life very difficult, because can you imagine taking Elfins or Pioneers away with single occupancy of tents? And I mean, if you're in a anything other than an ensuite hotel room, forget it. If you're talking about residential centres, but Elfins, single occupancy of tents, really quite hard going. The only groups that have successfully gone camping in Scotland so far have been venturers, for obvious reasons. Similarly, in Wales, they're not requiring testing, but they're saying that sleeping spaces have to be single household occupancy, whereas in Scotland they're saying it has to be single person, even if you normally sleep under the same roof at home. So there's another restriction there. Obviously, if people from Wales or England are joining our centrally organised residentials that are happening in England, then they have to fall in line with English restrictions as well, subject to any travel restrictions on them at the moment that they leave. Okay, so that's kind of the background, the guidance and the legislation that's backing up where we are at the moment. The other question that people are asking reasonably frequently is what's happening next, and the answer is, to be brutally honest, we haven't got a Scooby. There is certainty that there won't be a move to lighter restrictions before the 19th of July. We will probably hear from Her Majesty's government, although probably from the Daily Telegraph, in the week beginning the 12th of July. It normally takes a couple of days for the government to talk to the NYA and them to liaise and turn it into something that we can apply to the youth sector. And then the NYA, so normally the government either announce it or leak it on the Monday. And then the NYA have a webinar on about the Wednesday or the Thursday. And then we try and turn it around into something that groups can follow and distribute it to you for the following, early the following week. We don't know yet what those restrictions will be if and when they are announced, which could be as early as the 19th of July or might be later, depending what happens with the numbers in the next few weeks. We have been told by the National Youth Agency to expect that despite all of this Freedom Day that's being bandied about, and the fact that there will be limited restrictions still in place on anything to do with getting the economy moving, in the NGO sector, in the youth work sector, we should prepare ourselves to still be under some significant restrictions on our activities. Step 4 for the youth work sector will not be back to business as usual. That's been made very clear to us. If you to ask me, if I were a betting man, I think a significant change from where we are feels unlikely. We were given the go-ahead to go to camps and residentials, even though step 4 was delayed. I think we've got quite a good deal against what the numbers are telling us at the moment in the youth work sector. And that's a recognition of how important youth work and residential experiences are, in particular to the young people that we work with. However, it kind of feels like we've been given an advance on our pocket money, rather than that we've got significantly more and will get significantly more in the future. But I don't know, that's just my best guess. So if I'm honest, I would not plan, if I was you, for things to be very significantly different after the 19th of July. And I think it goes back to kind of hope for the best and plan for the worst. If you plan what you're doing within the restrictions that we know about at the moment, then the odds are it will be fine to carry it on, and you may even be able to invite more people, have more volunteers, loosen things up again if miracles happen and we are under a much more benign set of restrictions come the beginning of the summer holidays. So in terms of what you can be doing, as I said at the beginning, The safest thing would be not to camp, but no one's asking you to do that because we've not been camping for 2 whole seasons now, and everybody's ready, and it's really important, and it's fundamental to what we do and to our young people's experience of Ukraine. So we have to do it in the most safe and COVID secure way we can. That might be about camping as a group rather than a district. It might be about going away for less time, 2 nights rather than a week. 2 nights at the beginning of the summer holidays and 2 nights for a different group of people at the end of the summer holidays, whatever works for you. If you want to have a big thing for your whole district, for everyone that's involved in any of the groups, it may be that, I put these in the wrong order, it may be that a day camp might be the way to do it. So you have an activity day where people go round in different bubbles and they do a range of activities of the sort you might normally do on camp, but you don't stay over, because there is no restriction in numbers if you're not staying over, other than what you think you can safely, comfortably manage and the number of people you can persuade to turn up. There is advice that says that if you're delivering activities, you should be dividing people into consistent bubbles of 15 or so to make it easier to manage social distancing and all of those things that we need to do. And also, as I was saying to somebody earlier this week, to reduce the risk of the number of people that you have to phone up and say, actually, unfortunately, someone tested positive and therefore you've all got to stay in for 10 days. If you've done that in a session with 100 people and you didn't keep track of who was where and what was going on and who was sitting with who, to be safe, you're going to have to tell 100 people to self-isolate. Whereas if you keep people in bubbles of 15, you're only going to have to tell 14 people that they need to change their plans, which is definitely the call I prefer to be making. I'll leave support teams for a minute because that's a thing to talk about later. It may also mean significant rethinking of the way that we would normally do camping. I know we're all incredibly good at just kind of rolling out camp because we know how it works. Actually, the idea of a camp like we normally do it, with planned duties where we involve as many people as possible in the cooking of a meal, that's going to increase risk. And maybe however important we think it is that we all cook and eat together and all of those things, maybe we need to rethink things this time around so that we're doing in the safest, most COVID secure way possible, rather than doing them the way that we would normally do them to achieve the outcomes. It may be, depending on your volunteers and depending on your families, that actually it's all just a bit too much at the moment, and it may be better to delay until autumn and think about an indoor residential in autumn. Although you are also balancing a risk that we might be heading into another peak. So again, that's something to think about and discuss as district.